I'm going to open this video with a disclaimer that isn't really necessary, but I think it needs to be laid out all the same. I watch an awful lot of YouTubers, and one of the dudes I watch is Joseph Anderson. I like his long-form critique videos, but if I may be so bold as to offer critique of the critique, I think he sometimes lapses into wanting games to be things they aren't. Now, lots of people do this. This has been a consistent issue with the players of Destiny, and the Destiny franchise in general. I've done it, and Destiny 2 at launch was actually an exercise in Bungie doing that. Now, it's easy to say that a game is bad, when what we really mean is, I don't like this type of game. By all accounts, Persona 5 is a fantastic game. I didn't like it because I don't like turn-based combat. I don't find it particularly fun. I find it pretty boring, actually. But that doesn't mean it isn't a good game. And a valid criticism isn't, this game should have a real-time combat system. I bring this up only because Destiny 2's Forsaken expansion is very good at what it does. But it doesn't make the game into something it's not. In fact, it takes the game back to what it was and improves on that. So, if you didn't like Destiny because you don't like games like this, well, you're not gonna like Forsaken. But if you do like games like Destiny 1, but wish that it had been done better, Forsaken will impress. All through this year, while Destiny 2 languished in an embarrassing state, I asked myself why I liked the game at all, and I finally have an answer. Destiny 2 is a game that you can play and focus intently on without having to think all that much. I think an awful lot, and while I love film and music and games that make me think, I also have a need for a recreational game. One that just feels good to play, has a series of goals that one can work towards, and is highly polished and smooth. And a game that I can sit down and play whenever I want. Something that doesn't require intense focus from me. In the same way that every so often you'll sit down and watch an old TV show you've watched a million times, I like Destiny because it's something I can sit down and play and I know exactly what I'm going to get. I slip right into a mindset where all I'm focused on is playing Destiny. Well, that's what Destiny has always had. Sky-high production values, insanely tight shooting mechanics, and top-notch game feel. What it didn't have, really, was anything else. Well, Forsaken fixes an awful lot of problems. It isn't perfect. There's still a bunch of just fucking stupid shit in here that baffles me. But those are the exceptions, and almost all the huge problems from Destiny 2 have been addressed. There will be no spoilers in this video, by the way. There's an awful lot to talk about with Forsaken, so I'm going to have to break this into a few videos. Today's going to be just a broad overview of how Forsaken changes the way Bungie tells stories in their games and through their NPCs and level design. I'm not going to spoil the story, so feel free to watch to get a feel for what's changed here and whether it sounds like something you like. The story. I've never bothered putting a spoiler warning in a Destiny video, because the stories on offer were either insultingly predictable, mind-blowingly incompetent, or cringe-inducing levels of awful, or usually all of those things at once. Well, Forsaken has a story good enough that it can be spoiled, and what's even more impressive is that Bungie was able to keep their relatively shallow stories that even dummies can enjoy, while also having a surprising amount of depth and emotional impact just below the surface. How did they do this? Well, Forsaken finally adds a codex to Destiny. And to be completely honest, it is probably the best codex I have ever seen in a game. Destiny's in-game narratives are very straightforward Hollywood action movie plots, but existing outside of the game, on their fucking app or website, Bungie was paying talented writers to make amazing lore entries that nobody read. These lore entries were, in whole, works of art. I often criticize Bungie for refusing to simply provide tried and true solutions to problems. Instead of giving players a horde mode, Bungie gives players pseudo-horde modes. Instead of matchmaking, they make some absurd Rube Goldberg contraption called guided games. That would be the same guided games that now is in its second year of beta and is still a useless piece of shit, but we'll get to that in later videos. But when it comes to an in-game codex, Bungie's insistence on innovation and experimentation has been a tremendous success. Alright, how do most games handle their extra exposition? Usually through article-like codexes and written and audio logs out in the world. They're usually either straight exposition dumps or tape recorders that people for some reason recorded their deepest secrets, plans, and fears on, and then left laying around the game map for the player to stumble on. While these are necessary and often can be done quite well, they suffer from the developers overthinking. Instead of just having a codex with entries that explain things, developers think that they have to have an in-game reason for this information to be communicated to the player. So, how are we going to tell this to the player and still have it exist in the game? Well, let's just have the bad guy leave a tape recorder on the ground. Stuff like that. Bungie avoids this by simply deciding that there doesn't need to be any in-game reason for you to get the information. You aren't finding a tape recorder or a scrap of paper. You're simply unlocking lore entries by completing tasks. And free from the need to have the lore entries exist within the universe, Bungie can tell any story it wants in them, and they can be from any point of view they want. Important stories don't have to necessarily be told by the villain. Important stories can be 1,000 years old. There doesn't have to be an in-game reason for the information you're getting. You can get a literal God's eye view. Bungie can tell a story of a spaceship from 3,000 years ago, and it doesn't matter how we got this information. We didn't find a tape recorder on a ship. We didn't talk to an NPC who was there. We unlocked a piece of lore, and Bungie told us an interesting story. And freeing themselves from the constraints of having to stay within the universe has expanded the ability for them to tell stories way outward. And that's good, because the stories that Bungie is telling in these lore entries are fantastic. Many are highly poetic. They're often really obscure. These entries don't talk down to the audience. In fact, they assume that the audience is pretty intelligent. There's just no other way to say it. These lore entries stand on their own as poems, prose pieces, and works of art. Not only do they expand the universe outward and address some of the deeper cosmology and history and philosophy of the universe in Forsaken, they're used to add a ton of depth to the in-game narrative. Now again, I'm not going to spoil the in-game story, because for once Destiny has a story that can be spoiled, but I'm going to touch on something important here. Forsaken's story works as a very simple narrative. Cayde 6 is killed by Prince Uldren and his crew of corrupted Fallen. You hunt each of them down and avenge Cayde. It's easy enough for any player to understand. The missions are really well put together and satisfying. The cutscenes are impeccably done. It's a revenge story. But within the lore, if you take the time to read it, we learn about why Uldren is doing what he's doing. We learn about each of his barons, how all of them were outcasts. The barons are the Forsaken. They're the bottom of fallen society, exploited, left to die, starved, abused. Each of them is compelling and relatable. They have perfectly good reasons for revenge. So the beauty of the story is that it's not just your revenge story. The Scorn are out for revenge against the Fallen who abused them, the Guardians who've slaughtered them all over the galaxy, and used specifically for killing their friends. Uldren's motives are a bit more complex, and I don't want to spoil them if you haven't read the lore or gotten through the campaign yet. When you play these missions and read the lore in order as you unlock them, the story gets deeper and deeper. It has more and more emotional weight. And by the end, for the first time ever, the ending in a Destiny story surprised me. It's dark without being inappropriate for kids. It's complex without being confusing to people who just want a basic reason to shoot things in the face. It works on multiple levels. It's not just good for Destiny. The campaign and lore together are a good story, and a memorable one. I think the fact that Destiny's always had this hard separation between the in-game story and their unbelievably great lore isn't an accident. I've said before that Bungie is arrogant, and I stand by that. They have not trusted their audience. The fact that the writers at Bungie can create the Grimoire cards and the lore in this game and then turn around and give us the absolute dreck for in-game narratives that they gave us in Destiny 2, and especially Curse of Osiris and Warmind, that can only be on purpose. An effort to not be too deep, to not be confusing, to not be something that an 11-year-old can't understand. Forsaken, like Horizon Zero Dawn and other games, shows that you can do both. That simple stories can have depth below the surface for those who want it. I went into this campaign with zero expectations of it being good, and I left deeply impressed, not only with the improvement, but with the quality of the writing and the depth of the themes explored. It is a total success. NPCs. Alright. From the early days of Destiny, there was a problem with the storytelling that my then 6-year-old son noticed. One day, I was letting him play, and I swear to God this is true. As he was shooting a dreg, he turned to me and said, "Why can't we talk to them? Why can we only shoot them?" Why indeed. Destiny isn't a story about killing literal monsters. Every one of the enemy factions are a sentient, technological race of aliens. And if you read the Grimoire from Destiny 1, you knew that especially the Fallen aren't simply monsters and murderers. The Fallen are the Fallen because their civilization had been uplifted by the Traveler, just like ours, before the Traveler fled the darkness and abandoned them, leading to the complete destruction of their society. In Destiny 1, they're an enemy faction because they followed the Traveler to Earth because they want it back. They want answers, and they want to be lifted up again. It's pretty compelling stuff, actually. It's too bad then that you only end up speaking to one Fallen, and that one only about 8 months in after you'd already murdered literally thousands of them. The Fallen and Hive have always been the most interesting races because they are the most logically understandable. The Hive are trying to perfect the universe by killing everything they can. Their belief is that if something is able to be killed, it is unworthy of continuing to exist. That's dark and depressing, but it's understandable and interesting. The Fallen are basically humans, after the Traveler abandoned them. I wanted to play as a Fallen. I found it impossible to believe that there wouldn't be factions of Fallen who wanted peace, and factions of humans who simply wanted them eliminated because they were aliens. But none of that was ever in the game. The Fallen were, instead, monsters to shoot and nothing more. Just like the Hive, you had to go to the lore to find any of this stuff. In the Grimoire, again, on Bungie's app or their website. Forsaken finally changes that. The Spider is a planetary NPC that is, in my opinion, the best in-game NPC the game has ever had. The voice acting is fantastic. His motives are complex, he's understandable and relatable, and highly charismatic. I wish there was a lot more of him in the lore, but I suppose there's time for that in the future. Several missions in Forsaken will have you fighting alongside Fallen. You'll learn a tremendous amount about their culture and the lore entries, and if you're like me, you'll start to feel kinda bad killing them by the dozen. This is precisely what Destiny's storytelling has been missing, using the lore and in-game NPCs to flesh out the universe rather than simply be vendors. Every NPC has a moment in this expansion. Zavala and Ikora are characterized because they disagree on how to move forward after Cade's death, and both of them are right. Hell, even the gunsmith has real characterization, and if you finish the Ace of Spades exotic quest, you'll unlock some absolutely great Cade 6 lore entries. So damn good that I need to unlock the others because I'm fully invested in that story now. The new patrol area of the Tangled Shore is for once not just a shooting gallery, it's an actual place where the Fallen live. There's one area that's a tent city where Fallen have been living. There's a slum district. There's Bungie's greatest lost sector, which is a Fallen dance club with an illegal fight club in the back. Forsaken has cutscenes, of course, but unlike in previous Destiny content, just as much is told to the player through environmental storytelling, through an in-game codex, through planetary NPCs, and through the dialogue of the enemies you are fighting. Yes, even the actual enemies you're fighting finally talk to you in this expansion, and they have interesting things to say. Alright, I wanted to keep this brief because I'm going to do a video on gameplay, economy, progression, and on game modes in the next few weeks, as well as my Spider-Man review, so I think this is probably a good place to wrap up for now. Forsaken is very good. A triumph, really, and in my opinion, as good a story as Bungie has ever told. In the videos coming up, we will get to all the annoying bullshit that pisses me off, and don't worry, there is a ton of annoying bullshit that pisses me off, but for once, there is far more good than bad, and to my immense surprise, the story is a strong point. I never thought I'd be praising Destiny for its campaign and narrative, but here we are. If you were holding off on buying this, I can confidently say that the campaign alone was worth the money to me. It might have only been 12 to 20 hours, but I've paid $60 for 8-hour campaigns and been happy with it. If you play this campaign and read the lore, and if you like what Destiny is as a game, you will like this expansion. If you want Destiny to be something it isn't, you won't. Destiny still isn't a narrative-focused game. This isn't The Last of Us, and it isn't just a romp like Doom. Destiny is its own thing. If you like the game that Destiny is, and not what you want Destiny to be, then you will get your money's worth here. Alright, that's it for now. I'll see you next time. Thanks.